business of Lesser and Lesser in downtown St. Mary's. So with that introduction, Paul, let's start with perhaps the early history, as you remember it, of Lesser and Lesser. When did it become Lesser and Lesser? Was it always that, or whatever?
No, my dad started the store in 1904, and he bought out F.M. Holes and Son. And
now, what were they? Were they a jeweler too?
I feel he bought out the jewelry store because I think he worked for them a short time, having come here from a store in Johnsonburg that I don't even remember the name of. But he worked for Mr. Holes, and somehow or another worked out a deal and bought him out. And that was in 1904, which is a little bit before my time. But I get that from talking with my dad at the time. He ran the store, and he married my mother in, let's say about 1908 or 9. And
was your dad a St. Mary's native?
No, he was born in Ridgeway.
Oh, Ridgeway.
And grew up in Ridgeway, more or less. And see, he'd have been 28 years old when he bought the store. He was born in 76, so that made him about 28. And he had worked up until that time. In fact, helped my grandfather drill wells at one time. Water wells mostly, and in the Ridgeway area, so he did some work like that.
And then he came to St. Mary's.
Came to St. Mary's, bought the jewelry store, and established it, and it's been on the same corner ever since.
And it's probably one of the oldest businesses in the town?
Yes, I think there are older businesses in town right now. In existence, that's right. And I don't remember exactly how many years, but I'm pretty sure that they're a little older. But.
And then did it become Lesser and Lesser when you came in, or what?
Yes, he ran the business under the name of Leonard L. Lesser. And many people remember the mermaid logo that was on the windows and on all the stationery. And when I went into the business and got married in 1937, he took me in as a partner, and we changed the name to Lesser and Lesser. And it's been that ever since.
Okay. Now, did you always live right there?
I was born right upstairs in that building. And it was delivered by Dr. Cochran. You wouldn't remember Dr. Cochran.
The name is familiar.
He had a drugstore right there in the building. He ran the drugstore, and in the back of the drugstore was the doctor's office, which in those days, the doctor dispensed the medicine and the prescriptions and whatever he needed. He just took it out of his stock, and in the front end of the office was his drugstore.
Well, then, we're getting ahead here a little, and I want to go back to this, but as I recall, wasn't there a pharmacy in there? It seems when I was growing up, but not Cochran.
Yes, Dr. Cochran, I believe might have passed away, and he sold it to Mr. McCullough.
That was it.
Mac McCullough.
Yes.
And Mac McCullough was a pharmacist and operated as a drugstore, and he had a very unfortunate accident right there.
Didn't he get burned or something?
Yes, he reached up to the top of the shelf and upset the sulfuric acid onto his eyes, and I don't know if he was totally blind, but he was practically totally blind after that.
And then when did the Klausman girls come in their hat shop after that?
Well, the hat shop was in between the pharmacy and our store, and I think that was there many years, and I think it was there even
before.
Yes, because I can remember when I used to play upstairs, where I was born, my mother yelled, "Don't jump so, you'll break the gas mantles downstairs." And Miss Klausman ran the millinery shop, and I had to be careful not to jump so it didn't break her gas mantle. So that kind of dates that.
Well, as a child, then you played in that corner there a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now can you remember any of the things you did as a child or in that location?
Well, looking outside now and seeing the winter weather reminds me that at one time when it snowed, there were no snow plows, and Brussels Street developed into a series of ruts about 6 inches deep, and the cars would drive out those ruts, and if you got going out the same rut that a car was coming in, you had a little problem getting out of the rut. And I can remember damming up the ruts with snow as I was, a little tot, I don't know, and he got kind of mad when a car came out the rut and broke your dam.
And you played around there a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember who any of your friends were that you played with at that time?
Well, let's see. The Kinsella boys lived across the street.
Okay, now what were the businesses across the street, as you remember?
Well, let's see. The building, the yellow brick building there, right next to the alley, was Kinsella's Fruit Market. And they used to set their fruit out on the sidewalk.
Now that would be between what Brown's shoe store is now and that sports shop that was Rita Lee's. Is that where we are?
No. We're between Brown's Boot Shop and Radio Shack, where Radio Shack is now.
Okay.
That yellow brick building there was the Fruit Market.
That was Kinsella's.
That was Kinsella's. And they had a wholesale fruit business. They used to go to Buffalo and bring truckloads of bananas down, carried them down in the cellar, and they ripened them down in the cellar. We used to get down into those rooms once in a while, and the only light in there was a gas light, which was actually lit to keep the bananas ripening. They hung down there until they were ripe. Then they delivered them throughout all the grocery stores in the St. Mary's and Ridgeway area, I guess.
All right. People didn't come there to them to buy.
Well, they had the fruit market up in this, which I suppose you'd call the retail part, but the banana business and they had other fruits that they delivered wholesale. They were like a dealer to distribute.
A wholesaler.
Yeah.
Okay. What other businesses? Do you recall any other in that on that street there?
Well, right next then would be where the Radio Shack is now. It was started by Herb Street Brothers hardware store, and I can't remember the names of the Herb Street boys, but they ran the hardware store in there, and who followed that? I can't remember now, but Art McCune got in there and ran a hardware. Art McCune, yeah.
Yeah, Art was in there.
And he was in there.
That was in later years.
Yes, that was later, a little later on, and before that building was built, you might like to know that I can remember the barber shop that used to sit down in. You had to go down steps to go down to the barber shop, and Daddy Shower and Tommy Beimel had a barber shop in there.
On Brussels Street
on
there?
On Brussels Street, right across from our building there on the north side of Brussels Street.
Would that be where the Radio Shack?
Well, yes, before that building was built.
Oh, that was before.
Yeah, before that building was built. That was the barber shop was torn down and they built that building. And I don't remember who owned the building. Hubberberger was for a while, but and then following that, another thing I remember is down where the Northwest building is, right on that corner angle, used to be a little peanut stand run by Jim Dardis. And Jim Dardis was a crippled man, and he ran that little peanut stand, sold popcorn, peanuts, and candy, I guess. I don't really remember what all the stock was, but it wasn't very big.
No. Was that the forerunner of what we used to call Bud's Place?
Well,
or the ice
yes,
cream parlor?
No. After all these buildings were built the new building, Jim Dardis started an ice cream confectionery store in where the Yell County Travel Agency is now. In there was Jim Dardis's ice cream and confectionery of all types. He had booths, I think, for, I'm not sure about the booths. They were put in later, I think, for a restaurant. Then that changed from Jim Dardis. His nephew, Jim Lynch, took it over. After, I believe Jim possibly died, Jim Dardis died. And Jim Lynch took it over. And Jim Lynch ran it for quite a while. I think then he sold, and I hope I'm not leaving somebody out, but Am Rolich and his wife got in there.
Pardon me, Paul, Bud May was in there first.
But, I beg your pardon, that's right. Bud May was there first.
I remember them calling it Bud's Place.
I'm sorry, I forgot Bud, yes. he took it from
And then Rolick bought it off of Bud May, am I right?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. My memory isn't that real 100%, I guess.
All right, getting back to now your father's business, of this became lesser and lesser when you came into it. What was the repair business as great as it is today, or how would you compare business in it as it is today? The trends change, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, my dad had it as a jewelry store, and he did watch repairing, of course, but he was also an optometrist. And I can remember going in there, and people were sitting right in the middle of the front of the store looking at an eye chart up on the wall. He had a OD degree, I guess, which I think probably in those days was much easier to get than it is today. But he did that for quite a few years until it got to the point where he was bothered by the fact that when he was fitting somebody with a pair of glasses, the customer would come in. And what do you do? Stop, or you keep, or what do you do?
Well, did he make up the glasses too, or?
No, he would just make up the prescription and order them from a supplier that he had, 2 or 3 suppliers. And he did that quite a few years.
Did your dad have any other sidelines or anything else he did?
Well, not professionally, but he was quite a fisherman.
And did you acquire that love of fishing from him?
Unfortunately, no, because it got to the point where if one of us was going to go fishing, who went fishing? My dad, so I stayed in the store.
Very good.
Paul, I understand there you have your father had a very close friend, Don Neal.
Don Neal,
Can you
yeah.
tell us any stories about those two there together and fishing or something of that sort?
Well, Don Neal ran a little cleaning establishment up in the alley behind the store there, and he drank quite a bit of coffee, and he'd stop and take my dad over, and they'd get a cup of coffee across the street. And they did quite a bit of fishing together. And I can remember one story that Don tells about my dad. They went fishing one day, and he said to my dad, they were in the same car, he said, "Leonard," he said, "you're a stubborn old bugger." And I think that bothered my dad, because they went fishing, and on the way home, my dad says to Don Neal, "You know, Don, I'm not stubborn, I'm just determined." I don't know the difference, but...
Well, how long was Don up there? I can remember that.
Well, he was there quite a few years.
He wasn't from St. Mary's, was he?
I don't believe so, but I can't remember where he came from.
Wasn't he from Ford City or down in there someplace?
That could be. I don't remember.
Then he finally wound up in Warren, right?
In Warren, yeah.
And he wrote for the Erie paper.
Yes.
Sporting news.
He did a lot of sport
subject,
writing there. He's passed away since. And I don't
Was
know.
he a great sportsman?
Oh yeah. Oh, he just loved to fish. And I don't know about hunting, but he did a lot of fishing.
And his wife worked with him, I think.
His wife worked with him there in the shop, yeah.
So and now, what year did your father pass on?
My father died in 1958.
Was he active in the business right up until that time?
Well, up until the last 2 or 3 years, and then he was kind of bedridden for a while. And
Tell us about your mother. Since your father was a businessman and he loved to fish and he was on the go quite a bit, what did your mother do?
Well, my mother had her sister living with her. The 4 of us lived together, and she was like a second mother to me, and she worked in the jewelry store. And well, usually she worked mornings, and my mother would work afternoons. I don't know how they came by the arrangement, but that's the way it worked out. And each one had their duties. One had the cleaning to do, and the other one had the mailing and the bookwork to do, so they had it pretty well organized. And of course my dad took care of the repair work and the sales and so on. And
Paul, they always say 2 women can't live in the same house. Did they Did they get along very well?
They got along very well. In 1936, my dad and my aunt and my mother and another couple from Ridgeway were on a trip to listen to or to hear a new minister down below Pittsburgh someplace. And they were involved in an accident, and all four of them were killed. My dad was very badly hurt and in the hospital in Greensburg for a while. And it was a bad accident, and since after that then, my dad, I was in college at the time, and I went back to finish that year. It happened in March, the 8th, in fact, 1936. And I finished that year and came home and worked with my dad for the summer. And when I went back to school in the fall, then sophomore year at college, I found that my dad apparently missed me, and he and his housekeeper, who we got to take care of the housework, would drive down to college almost every week. And I got to the point where I began to worry about him, and then on top of that I found a girl down there that I liked, so we kind of planned to get married in the spring of 37, so late in 36 I quit school and came to work with my dad.
Well, now I kind of lost track here. Was your mother killed and
Yes,
your aunt killed?
My mother and aunt were both killed. And I started on that, then kind of forgot. My dad always admired both of them, of course, and he put up a tombstone that I've always kind of cherished. He put a chain between the two headstones, and he put on the headstones, inseparable in life, inseparable in death. Kind of a cute thing.
That was very nice.
And it's over in the cemetery at Eryville, if you ever drop by and see it.
Eryville.
Yeah. But they were very close, the two of them.
That's wonderful. Nice memories there,
Yeah.
Paul. Well, now anything else you want to tell us about the business on Brussels Street?
Well,
There was one question I have there in dealing with the Kinsellas. If I recall, isn't it so that Mary also had a beer garden there?
yes. That was after the fruit market, and probably after Mr. and Mrs. Kinsella passed away, because Mary ran a beer garden there. Can't remember now what she called it, but that's where
Mary's Place or something.
something like that, yeah. I'd forgotten that.
What, she just sell beer? Was that? I don't know.
I can't remember if she had any hard liquor or not, whether they had to have permits back in those days or not.
Yeah.
I really don't remember, but I knew there was a beer garden there, yeah. Well, to go a little further then, in 1937, my son, 1977, 1937 we were married. 1977, my son came into the business with me.
That's Tom.
That's Tom, yeah. And it was still lesser and lesser, of course, and we just let it go like that. And he has since become the sole owner, and I'm retired.
All right. Well, you're really not retired because you have a lot of things you do.
Oh, well.
Now, we want to hear about, how did you get into the amateur radio?
Well, that happened way back when I was in high school. I took the examinations in 1934, I think it was, and became a ham operator.
How did you get interested in it?
I think that there were several of us boys involved, Freddie Weiss and Clayton Weiss and Mr. Brock at the Boys Club. We all got our licenses about the same time.
Did this kind of originate from the Boys Club?
Well, no, it kind of settled though at the Boys Club. We all got had our own equipment at home, a radio station, and we congregated at the Boys Club and finally put a station in at the Boys Club and operated from there. I can remember going in there and staying all night because it was a juicy thing to work a station in Europe or Russia or Australia. And in order to do that, the frequencies that we were using, we had to be there all night when the band opened up in the middle of the night. And we did that 2 or 3 times just as a kind of a lark, I guess.
Well, tell us how this worked. You had call letters and all this. Now, take us through what you did at the machine or...
Well, I built most of the equipment that I had at home. The transmitter I built, but the receiver was usually a commercially made receiver because you could buy better ones than you could build. And you'd sit there hour after hour sometimes and pound out the code with a little key. And
is that a Morse code? Or?
Morse code,
Morse
yeah.
code.
And it was later years before I got voice, but when I had the Morse code, I'd stay up quite late at night to work these. We called it DX, and it was. I'm quite proud of the fact that I accumulated 48 cards, one from each state, by doing that. And
now, what do you mean cards?
They called them QSL cards, and all it was an acknowledgement. It had my call letters on and the call letters of the station that I talked to, and the date, of course, and everything. And you hung them up on a wall on a big card so you could see to show you had all 48 states, and that was quite an accomplishment.
Ah, yeah.
And as I kept working, I reached a point where I belonged to what they called the DX Century Club. I had worked every continent, and it was just fun to talk to people. A lot of them didn't speak English, but you usually got some lingo that you could get back and forth with.
Well, did you make any friends? I mean, were there people you talked to often, or how did...
Yes, you had all kinds of contacts. Some that you would make many contacts with. Others you were one at a time. You never heard of them again. But the closest ones, of course, we would get together about once a year. They organized what they called a ham fest down in Pittsburgh. I used to go down there almost every year and meet some of the friends that were close by and that I talked to and knew their calls or remembered them. And, everyone had to have the license, and they had to pass a code test and a written theory test. It was.
Was that hard?
Well, it was kind of hard. They had two classes. The advanced class was very hard. The exam was very hard.
Now, what would the advanced class? What would be the difference of that class and another class?
Well, mostly radio theory, circuit theory, and you had to draw the circuits and explain how they worked and different things like that. And although there were a lot of federal regulations that you had to be able to understand and pass on.
Did you have to pay a fee to the government for that?
No, that's all free.
That was all free. Do you do any of that today?
No. We moved up to this Wolfville Avenue in 1971, and I kind of lost interest, partially because of the fact that the lot isn't big enough to put up an antenna like I wanted. It takes about 130 feet of length to get the antenna working. But I could have put up verticals, but I just never got around to that. I just kind of lost interest, I guess.
Well, after all those years. Now, did you teach this at the Boys Club? Did they have a class in this?
Yes, we had several classes. What we would teach would be that work with the young fellows, teaching them the Morse code, because you had to pass a code test at 13 words a minute, I think you had to copy. In other words, that's 5-letter words. So it's about 65 characters in a minute or more to pass the code test. And I understand within the last year or so, the FCC has abolished the code test, so it's much easier to get the amateur license right now than it was then.
Paul, I have a question. I've heard in the past where a lot of these amateur radio operators have intercepted messages of distress and so on, just by chance that they've picked those up. Could you give us any information or a story about picking up some kind of a distress signal on the ocean, or of somebody, their home on fire, or something of that sort?
The main first thing I think of when you talk about this is I think it was the 1936 flood, and the town of Renova and other towns down there lost all their communication, and a group from St. Mary's, I didn't happen to be involved with this, but this group from St. Mary's took what we call portable equipment and took it down to Renova, 3 or 4 or 5 fellas, and I don't remember who all was involved, and they provided communication in and out of Renova for 2 or 3 days. That was the only communication in and out of Renova because the telephone lines were all down and there was very little electricity, and they did this with a battery-controlled pack.
Was that during the period of time when the dam burst?
No, this was just the 36 flood.
Was this
The
after
dam
that?
burst a long time before that, didn't it? I don't know.
That I can't recall. But this 36, I'm pretty sure it was 1936 was the bad flood. I'm not positive about that.
That would be
Wait a
the
minute.
Johnstown flood, right?
It was
During the period of the
No, this would be the March 17th was the day of the flood. Now that I remember, because I was on my way down to see my dad in the hospital in Pittsburgh. He was still there from the accident. And we had trouble getting through Pittsburgh because of the flood conditions in the Pittsburgh area. We did finally get out to Greensburg, where he was.
So it did serve a purpose
Oh, yes.
in the disaster.
Yes, it can be very useful in that sense. And a lot of the fellows, I can't remember who the boys, but they all came, I think they all belonged to the club, at the boys' club at the time, and they just got together and drove down there, and they stayed 2 or 3 nights or 2 or 3 days.
Is there any of that ham radio going on today in St. Mary's?
Oh, yes. We had a meeting last Sunday, and that's the second meeting that I attended, kind of a reorganization of an amateur radio club, and there was a piece in the paper about it about a week ago. They're trying to get a club started where the fellows will be active again. A lot of these boys are new, and they're very active, but I just haven't gotten involved in it.
Who are some of these other members that you know of here in St. Mary's?
In St. Mary's is Bumps Reimer. He's been licensed as long as I have. Wilbur's his first name. I shouldn't call him Bumps. Anyway, and Mr. Brock was very active. Of course, he's passed on. And
Talking about the Boys Club there for a couple of minutes, do you have any stories about Mr. Henry Brock?
Well, he sponsored getting the equipment into the Boys Club, and he took his amateur radio license, and he was active, had the license and license to operate, and did it from his home, much the same as all of us did. We all had it there, and then additionally went to the Boys Club and chewed the fat around the table and worked on what was down there.
Well, let's talk about dancing. We're going to dance now.
Well,
when did you start that, and how did you get interested in the square dancing?
My wife and I started that in 1966.
Oh, you were the people that started the square dancing?
No, not really. The Historical Society in December of '65 had a group come in here square dancing from Oil City as a demonstration. And it was up at the Elk County Christian High School gym, as I recall it now, and they put on this demonstration, and so many of us were there and interested in it that they agreed to come and establish a group and teach them to square dance. So in the spring of '66, the club was formed, and Hum Haynes was very active, Hum and Ellis Haynes, and Pauline and Bill Olson were officers for the first time. I can't remember who the others were, but from that on, a caller came down from Bradford named Don Curtin. He came down and taught us square dancing. And it took us all of 1966. I think we graduated as square dancers along about Thanksgiving time. And the club's been active ever since.
All right, do you have any stories you want to tell about?
Well, in 1976, my wife passed away, and square dancing, of course, is a couple activity. And when she passed away, I thought, oh, I'm going to miss this. And shortly after that, our club caller passed away. And everybody looked at Lesser and they said, Lesser, you're going to be our caller. And I said, ha, 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 can't do that. But I did learn something about it, and I like it, and it just keeps me in the activity.
Mm-hmm. What about members? How many members are involved?
Well, right now, I would say we have about, I'd have to look at the list to be sure, I'd say 65. Some are much more active than others, of course, and well, we get along with that. We dance every Tuesday night.
Do you call every?
No, I don't call. I teach the class.
Oh, you
right
teach.
Now. I call a couple times a year for the club, but we have all guest callers coming in to do the calling. And
now, are you a guest caller in some other community?
I have done it, but I don't do it very much anymore.
Now, the reason for the guest callers, is that for flexibility or for?
Well, that's part of it, and the fact that the only two choices you have is either somebody would do all the calling, or you get guest callers in. And our club just decided that the best thing for our club was different callers, and each one has a little different style, although it's basically the same. It is a little different.
I suppose there's always a favorite caller or something.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, is that, and why is that? I mean, if it's basically the same, why would there be certain ones that would be favorite?
I wish I could answer the question, but actually, we have people that say, "Oh, I'm not going to come to dance tonight. That's so-so call," and they don't like it. Well, it's something
personality?
about. Well, that may be part of it, but mostly it's some of the things he calls and puts them together a different way than somebody else. You almost have to be a square dancer to understand these things.
I've never heard a woman caller. Are there any?
Oh yes, yeah, there are quite a few. We have one comes up from the Katanning area. We have her 2 or 3 times a year, and.
Do they make real good callers? I mean,
oh yeah. A lot of people don't like them because of their high-pitched voice, but she does a good job. I think she does a good job.
Tell me this, you also have a school for people that want to learn, right?
Yeah. The school that I started teaching was founded under the adult education at the high school, and we had it on a Monday night. And we have had such small classes that we cannot carry on Monday night. We've had to move it to Tuesday night before the regular dance. So we get the instructions in then, and they take about 35, 40 lessons, and then they can join the club.
Okay, would you like to place a call for anyone that would like to learn, and who to contact and when?
Anybody that's interested in square dancing can call me or the president of the club. Right now is Dick and Leona Fritz. And in the fall we will be starting another class if we can get enough people together to make it work. You almost have to have 8 people, 4 couples, or at least 4 of one sex and 4 of the other sex to work together. And anybody that's interested, we'd be happy to have them.
Now, what about the round dancing? That's getting popular, isn't it?
Round dancing is called by Sam Secor from Ridgeway. He's our round dance caller. And our club has we call them tips of square dancing. 1 tip, and then the round dancers that like to do rounds are cued by Sam Secor, and there's 2 of those round dances in between every tip. So it makes an interesting evening, and some people like the round dancing, some people like the square dancing, and some like both, so it's kind of a mixed variety.
Well, what else do you do?
Well, I guess not a lot. I can't think of anything else. I work in the store with Tom. That keeps me kind of busy.
Paul, as you think back over the years now, how how have things changed? What's a big change you see overall in St. Mary's and the way it operates? Or
Well, the being in business has certainly changed. I can think of one story that right after I got into business with my dad, or maybe even after he passed away, this couple came in the store and said to me, "We'd like to buy our wedding rings here. My mother and dad bought their wedding rings here, and we'd like to buy ours here." But those things have disappeared. There is no more of that, what do you call it, loyalty or whatever you want to call it. Everybody kind of does their own thing now. But it's kind of that story was kind of interesting. I just mentioned it.
Ann mentioned there something, I think what she was driving at was periods of time. As an example, there would be a difference in periods of time between, let's say, right after World War II, and then before that, and back when your father was first married and when he first started his business. You know, can you relate to some of those changes of periods in time of your business?
Well,
wasn't there a great big change right after World War II? There was so much money to be spent and so on.
Yeah, that's true. And then right after that time, too, there were shortages. That, for example, watches, you couldn't buy any watches you wanted for a while. Eventually that, of course, took over, but right in that time, otherwise the business is...
Well, what about watches now? Let's talk about that for a minute. Now, all watches seem to be made the same with a spring. Now we have electronic watches and so on. How much of a problem is that to a jeweler as far as repair and so on?
Well, it's an entirely different problem. The electronic watches, we call quartz watches, all use a small battery. So it means that somewhere about once a year the battery has to be renewed, and it's not very big, probably the size of a eraser on a lead pencil. Some of them, some a little bigger, some a little smaller. But that has taken over the watch industry almost 100%. There are very few wind-up watches at the present time. The main reason, I think, being that the quartz watches are extremely accurate. I can remember my dad was inspector for the Shawmut Railroad, and every engineer and every conductor and every brakeman had to have a pocket watch that would pass inspection. And my dad would have to inspect it periodically, clean it, oil it, and you could get those pocket watches very accurate, we thought. They'd be within, say, a minute a month. That was excellent. But these new quartz watches will run within 5 seconds a year. So they're very accurate.
Tell me more about your father as an inspector then. Was he an inspector for the Pennsylvania Railroad also on their watches and so on?
I can't recall that he was, but because the Pennsylvania was not headquartered here quite the sense that the Shawmut was. The Shawmut had the big offices up on Lafayette Street there, and they were more or less local engineers. But the Pensy had a few locals, but mostly they were from out of town, and so I think most of their inspections were done out of town. I mean, I'm not really sure about that, but I believe so.
I recall my grandfather was a conductor on the V.R.P., and they were very, very proud of their watches.
Yes, they were.
All railroad men.
The old-timers used to brag among themselves about, my watch weighs 1.5 pounds, my watch weighs less than 1 pound. But why, I don't know, but used to be the bragging anyway.
Well, you know, there's an interesting point raised here. A jeweler today doesn't have to be as technical or as experienced, because his repair is now basically a battery in a watch.
There's a lot less wind-up watches to repair, and it's an entirely different field. Now you have to have some electronic knowledge in order to replace the batteries, and the movements of a good quartz watch can be replaced if it's beyond repair, which can happen. Electric circuits go bad and so on.
Well, Paul, going into your store there, I think of these beautiful clocks often sitting on the counter, apparently waiting for the owner to come and get them. But those clocks always look so nice. What about old clocks, and how attached are people to them, and so on?
We have been doing quite a bit of clockwork of recent years, and as you say, they sit on the counter mainly because we don't have any place to put them.
But
we have
they're so beautiful.
Yes, some of them are very beautiful, and I've got several in there now that I'm sure were made around the turn of the century, although it's difficult to date them. You can tell by the way the wood's made and so on. And the people, some of them are getting them fixed up because they belonged to their grandmother or something like that. And
Paul, are they hard to repair, or not? Or
well,
can you get
no,
the parts
they're not hard to. It's hard to get parts sometimes. We've had times we had to make parts, and doing that becomes kind of expensive, and some people don't want to go into it, but most people do. So.
What would you date an old clock? That you get, an average. My mother had that Seth Thomas. She repaired that, and I don't know, it was on our mantle ever since I can remember. It probably isn't all that old. But can you usually date one of those clocks fairly close?
Well, no. A lot of the old, very old clocks would often have a paper in the back of it that would say patented 1888 or something. And those you can kind of get an idea of the age. But otherwise, there's not much, because there are no numbers on 90% of the clocks, and no model numbers or anything like that.
Well, who were the big clockmakers, do you know?
Oh, Seth Thomas was a big one.
They're out of existence today, though? I don't particularly mean that one.
There's a funny thing has happened in the watch and clock industry, and it's partially explained in this way. There used to be a Hamilton watch, for example, an Elgin watch, a Waltham watch, a Wadsworth watch. Now, most of those are not made anymore, but somebody has bought the name Hamilton and Waltham and Elgin, and they put the name on watches imported from Switzerland many times. And the name is still alive, but the background and the originality of the company is gone. I mean, they're just out of business, and all they own is the name, if you understand what I'm saying.
Isn't it strange, though, that dates were never put on those clocks? Usually a company would date their product.
Why, I don't know, but it's just never there. In watches now, the better watches, like the old Hamilton, Elgin, Waltham, had serial numbers in them, and model numbers you could get within a few years of the date a watch was made, but clocks, no.
Paul, does anybody ever bring in those lapel watches, those old lapel watches for repair?
Yes, we fix a few of those, yeah.
Can they still be repaired?
Most often, yes, but we're beginning to have trouble more and more getting some of the older material. I guess there just isn't enough demand for it, and although you can, like I say, we have sources to make things, but they're very expensive to have made at today's wages, you know what I mean.
Tell us a little more about your family, Paul. I understand you have two boys besides your son Tom.
Two boys. The oldest boy is David, and he is situated in Allison Park, married, and he has three boys. The youngest of which now is a freshman at Penn State, and the son Gary lives 40 minutes away from him on the north side of Pittsburgh, near the Ross Park Mall, if you know where that is. And no children in that family, and Tom is the one boy here in lives with him this winter in St. Mary's, Travis.
So you're a grandpa 4 times.
I'm a grandpa 4 times.
Is there anything else you want to tell us before we...
Well, I really can't think of much of anything else. Kind of exhausted my repertoire.
Well, it's been really very enlightening to talk to you, Paul. We've certainly enjoyed this, and we'll be seeing you on TV, St. Mary's TV.
Okay. Oh, there was a question you forgot to ask him about the
Oh,
consolidation.
the consolidation. Yes, we asked everybody about the consolidation. What are your feelings on it?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a big step, but I think it can be worked out, and I think we have to do it, and I think it's nice to do.
Good. With that, we'll end on that positive note from
Okay.
St. Mary's, Paul.
Bye.